My name is Allison Connor, and I was 32 years old when I realized that the bed I had been sleeping in for 3 years was no longer mine. He's sleeping here tonight, he said, his voice already rehearsed, already positioned to sound reasonable. You can take the couch. He said it the way someone announces a weather update, not a decision that fractures a life. I didn't respond right away. I was sitting upright in bed, the blue glow of his phone still fading as he ended the call. I already knew who it had been. I always knew. Lena Harris, his ex-girlfriend from college, the woman who existed in a permanent state of emergency, whose crises somehow always outranked my presence in his life. It was 12:37 a.m. on a Tuesday. His phone had buzzed first. I watched him let it ring out. Then mine buzzed. Lena again. I ignored it. A minute later, his phone rang, and this time he answered. I listened to the familiar cadence of concern, the sighs, the soft reassurances, the language he never used with me when I was the one unraveling. She's at the Hollow Bar, he said after hanging up already, pulling back the covers. She's had too much to drink. Her gallery show bombed. Nothing sold. She's not okay. I stared at the ceiling, feeling something heavy and old settle in my chest. She can take a cab, I said, or sleep it off in her car. She's 31, not a child. She's emotionally fragile, Allison, he snapped, already reaching for the extra pillow from the closet. She needs someone to watch over her in case something happens. The word watch echoed unpleasantly. She can sleep on the couch, I said. That had always been the boundary, the one I had swallowed resentment to enforce politely for 2 years. He didn't look at me. It's not good for her to sleep on the couch. I sat up fully now. Then where exactly do you expect her to sleep? That was when he turned to me, pillow clutched to his chest like a shield irritation flashing briefly before settling into moral superiority. She's sleeping here tonight, he said. You can take the couch. The words hung there obscene in their calmness. I laughed once short and hollow. You're joking. Don't be heartless, he replied. If you loved me, you'd understand. I'm just being a good person. There it was. The trap. My discomfort rebranded as insecurity. My boundary reframed as cruelty. His prioritization of another woman elevated to moral virtue. And if you loved me, I said quietly, you wouldn't ask me to leave my own bed for your ex-girlfriend. His face hardened. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to be understanding. He walked out before I could say anything else. 20 minutes later, I heard the front door open. Lena's voice drifted in, slurred but theatrical. I stood in the doorway and watched him kneel beside her, offering water, whispering reassurances. She leaned into him too much, her eyes flicking to mine, just long enough for a triumphant smirk to appear before she collapsed onto my side of the bed. That was when I understood. This wasn't about Lena. This was my final exam, and I already knew I wasn't going to sit it. I didn't argue. That was the part he never anticipated. He was used to negotiations, to my careful explanations, to me trying to make him see how much I was bending without ever breaking. Silence, on the other hand, unsettled him. Silence meant the script had changed, and he didn't yet realize he'd lost his role as director. I stood there for a moment longer, watching the tableau in the living room, like a stranger observing a scene through glass. Lena was slumped dramatically against him now, her shoes kicked off her head, resting on his shoulder as if it belonged there. He murmured soft encouragements into her hair, the same tone he used when he wanted to feel indispensable. When he guided her down the hallway toward the bedroom, she leaned into him with exaggerated helplessness, and just before they disappeared from view, her eyes met mine again. This time there was no need for subtlety. The victory was complete. She had my place, and she knew it. I turned away before the door to the bedroom closed. The couch held no appeal. The idea of lying there all night listening to the quiet sounds of my own bedroom, while another woman occupied my side of the bed, under his watchful care, felt like a humiliation I refused to volunteer for. Something inside me shut down with a clean, mechanical click. The noise in my head, the bargaining, the disbelief, the ache went silent, replaced by a calm so sharp it almost felt electrical. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I went to the hall closet and pulled out my suitcase, the hard-shell one we'd bought together for a weekend trip months earlier, back when I still believed we were building something shared. I rolled it into the spare room and closed the door softly behind me, as if courtesy still mattered. Then I began to work. I packed like someone solving a logistical problem. Passport, birth certificate, social security card, my laptop and charger, the folder with my investment statements, and the retirement account I'd opened long before him. I took only what was indisputably mine, leaving behind anything that required emotional negotiation. In the bedroom, they were already asleep. Lena sprawled diagonally across the bed, snoring lightly, her arm flung out over my pillow. He sat in a chair pulled up beside the mattress head, bowed toward her, one hand resting protectively near her shoulder, like a sentry on duty. It would have been touching in another life. In mine, it was confirmation. I moved quietly, opening drawers, selecting clothes with detached precision. Jeans, t-shirts, underwear, socks. I left the sweater he'd bought me last winter. It had never fit quite right anyway. I left the novelty gifts, the shared souvenirs, the things that belonged to a version of us that no longer existed. From the bathroom, I took my toothbrush and razor and left the cologne he liked best on me, sitting untouched on the counter. The last thing I packed was a small fireproof box from the top shelf of the closet. Inside were my grandfather's watch and letters from my brother overseas, things that had nothing to do with him, things that anchored me to a life that predated this one. When the suitcase was zipped closed, I looked around the room one final time. The man I had loved was keeping watch over someone else. The woman in my bed had won something hollow. I felt nothing at all. In the kitchen, I found a scrap of paper and wrote 2 lines. No explanations, no appeals, just the truth reduced to its simplest form. Enjoy your patient. Don't contact me. I left the note on the counter with a cheap plastic pin holding it in place, the one he always complained about. My keys were in the bowl by the door. I slipped my car key off the ring and left the apartment key behind. It made a small metallic sound when it landed sharp and final. The night air in the hallway was cold and clean. I didn't look back when I closed the door. In the underground garage, I loaded the suitcase into my trunk and sat behind the wheel for a moment, hands resting lightly, breathing evenly. Only then did I take out my phone. I sent 3 sentences to my best friend. It's over. I need your couch for a few days. I'll be there in 20 minutes. His reply came almost instantly. Doors open. Are you okay? I typed back the truth. Yes. Before putting the car in reverse, I blocked his number, then his social media, then every shared digital thread that tied me to that apartment, that bed, that life. It took less than a minute, an administrative task. When I finally drove out of the garage and into the quiet city streets, I didn't feel like someone fleeing. I felt like someone leaving a job that no longer served her, with a clear understanding that the resignation had been overdue. The silence in the car wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. Jake's couch sagged in the middle and smelled faintly of stale beer and dog, and it was the most comfortable place I had slept in years. For the first 3 nights, I lay there staring at the ceiling, not replaying the argument, not rewriting the ending in my head, but marveling at the absence of tension. There was no door creaking open at midnight, no sudden crisis call, dragging us out of bed, no quiet calculation about whether tonight would become another emergency that didn't involve me at all. The quiet was neutral, expansive. It belonged to no one but me. I didn't take time off work. I went in the next morning like any other day, coffee in hand, hair pulled back, face composed. I wrote reports, answered emails, sat through meetings, and ate a turkey sandwich at my desk while listening to a podcast about something trivial and forgettable. The world didn't pause because my relationship had ended. That was the first revelation. My life was capable of moving forward even while something inside me had been severed. The compartmentalization felt almost like a superpower I hadn't known I possessed. Jake didn't push for details. The first night he handed me a beer and asked one question. So what happened? I shrugged. He chose her. So I left. That was all. He knew enough about Lena to understand the implications. His jaw tightened, but he didn't press. He just nodded and said the couch was mine for as long as I needed it. My phone became a useless brick. No notifications except work emails and Jake asking if I wanted pizza. Even though I'd blocked him everywhere, the habit of anxiety lingered. I'd catch myself glancing at the screen expecting a message that would apologize or more likely demand something. Each time nothing appeared, I felt a small physical release, like setting down a weight I'd been carrying for years without realizing how heavy it was. On the 4th morning, Jake slid his phone across the kitchen counter toward me. She's texting me now, he said, his expression somewhere between annoyance and grim amusement. On the screen was a message from him. Is Allison with you? Please tell her to call me. This is ridiculous. I pushed the phone back without really looking. You don't have to be the middleman. Tell him whatever you want. Jake told him I was alive and left it at that. The next message came a few hours later. She's really going to throw away 3 years over one misunderstanding. The word misunderstanding made me exhale a short, humorless breath. It was a deliberate minimization, an attempt to shrink a calculated decision into a simple miscommunication. I felt no anger reading it, only a distant contempt. "Don't answer," I said. Jake nodded. He understood. The messages escalated in predictability. "Lena left this morning. Are you happy now?" Then, "Can we talk like adults?" Finally. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. Come home so we can talk it out." Each one followed the same pattern. No apology, no ownership, just a declaration that the problem had been removed and I was expected to resume my place. I watched the cycle like a biologist observing a familiar species behavior. Jake shook his head. "He thinks this is a fight," he muttered. "He doesn't realize it's over." He was right. There was no fight. I had simply surrendered the field. The following week, I used my lunch break to find an apartment. It was a small, modern studio in a building with a gym and a concierge, clean lines, and no history. When the property manager asked why I was moving, I said, for a change of scenery, and meant it. I signed a 12-month lease without hesitation. When I moved in, it was with a suitcase, an air mattress, and one folding chair. The emptiness felt luxurious. There were no memories embedded in the walls, no arguments echoing in the corners. I began rebuilding a routine that had nothing to do with him. I joined a climbing gym downtown, the physical exertion burning through the last of the restless energy I'd been carrying. I reconnected with friends from college I'd drifted from because he always found them a bit immature. We went to trivia night and came in dead last, laughing the entire time. Jake became my reluctant newsfeed, reporting developments with a tone that suggested both disbelief and inevitability. A mutual friend ran into him and Lena at a trendy brunch spot. They were cozy, Jake said, making air quotes. A few days later, he showed me an Instagram post. Lena and him on a mountain trail, the city sprawling below. She was glowing in expensive athletic wear, and he stood behind her with his hands on her shoulders, staring into the camera like he was auditioning for something. The caption read like a thesis statement, when you find someone who finally appreciates your adventurous side. #new beginnings, #no settling. I studied it for a moment, then handed the phone back. "Good for them," I said. Jake blinked. "You're not mad." I shook my head. "What's the point?" "She's someone I used to know." And that was the second revelation. Indifference isn't something you feel. It's the absence of everything else. It's silence. The karma didn't arrive with drama. There were no late-night calls, no whispered apologies, no cinematic moment where the truth crashed down all at once. It came the way real consequences usually do, quietly, incrementally, with a sense of inevitability that made it almost boring if it hadn't been so precise. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after I left. I was on the floor of my new apartment, assembling a flat-pack bookshelf, a podcast murmuring in the background, the clean scent of fresh paint still faintly lingering in the air. My phone buzzed beside me. "Jake." I put it on speaker without looking up. "What's up?" His voice carried a strange mix of disbelief and restrained satisfaction. "You're not going to believe this," he said. I tightened a screw and waited. Lena got arrested. I paused the screwdriver hovering midair. "Go on," I said. My voice steady, more curious than shocked. "Petty theft," Jake continued. She walked out of a high-end camera store with a lens worth a couple of grand stuffed in her jacket. Security footage was crystal clear. Didn't even try to be subtle. I went back to tightening the screw, the bookshelf beginning to take shape. "That's not all," he added, momentum building. "When the cops looked into her, it opened a whole mess. Turns out she's been borrowing money from multiple people with the same sob story. Big client payout coming. Funds tied up. You know the routine." I felt a small cold click of understanding settle into place. The brunches, the new gear, the hiking trip. "She borrowed $3,000 from him last week," Jake said. Said it was for new portfolio equipment. The story assembled itself effortlessly. It wasn't a tragic spiral or a sudden fall from grace. It was a pattern repeating itself with a new sponsor. Jake hesitated before continuing. "One of the people she borrowed from is another guy she'd been seeing. Thought they were exclusive. He's the one who tipped off the store to watch her." I finished tightening the last screw and stood the bookshelf upright. It was sturdy, functional, exactly what it was meant to be. How's he taking it? I asked, asking for information, not out of concern. Jake exhaled. Bad. Embarrassed. Humiliated. Out $3,000 he probably doesn't have. Her friend group is splitting. Some feel sorry for him. Others are saying he made his choice. I stepped back and looked at the empty shelves waiting to be filled with things I would choose. That's unfortunate, I said. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. That's it? Jake finally asked. She played him. She stole from him. Don't you feel... I don't know. A little sorry, I set the screwdriver down and leaned against the counter, taking in the quiet of my apartment. No, I said the word absolute. If I felt sorry, it would mean I was still connected to their drama. I'm not. These are the consequences of their decisions. She wanted a story where she was the wounded artist and he was the devoted savior. Now she's moved on to the next chapter and he's learning what that role costs. Jake let out a low whistle. You're really free of it, he said. I smiled faintly. I'm building a bookshelf, I replied. That's all I'm doing. A few days later, the first attempt came. A text from an unknown number lit up my phone while I was waiting in line for coffee. I guess you heard. You were right. Can we talk? I didn't hesitate. I typed one word, no, then blocked the number. The entire exchange took less than 10 seconds. The second attempt involved a proxy. My desk phone rang at work, and the receptionist announced a call from Maya Harris, his older sister, the sensible one who'd once told me I deserved better than the chaos. Her voice was careful, strained. He's really hurting, she said. He knows he made a mistake. People make mistakes. I listened politely, then replied with the calm professionalism I reserved for difficult clients. I wish him well, Maya, but I'm not part of his life anymore. I hung up gently. The third attempt was the ambush. A rainy Thursday evening, a soft knock at my apartment door. When I looked through the peephole and saw him standing there, soaked and exhausted, something inside me settled instead of flaring. I opened the door just enough to see him fully, the hallway's cold air rushing in. Please, he said, hope flooding his eyes. 5 minutes. I didn't step aside. I didn't invite him in. You shouldn't be here, I said. I asked you not to contact me. He launched into the script, regret, betrayal, realization. I let him finish. That's unfortunate, I said, when he finally stopped. The word hit him like a slap. That's all, he demanded, anger bleeding through the desperation. After everything, I met his gaze without softness or cruelty. There is no us, I said. There hasn't been for months. When I closed the door, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. The silence that followed was cleaner, deeper. I went back to my living room, sat on the couch, and looked at the bookshelf standing quietly against the wall. It held nothing yet, and that was the point. The story he chose was no longer mine to read. The thing no one ever tells you about closure is that it isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with vindication or a swelling soundtrack. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like a steady, almost boring sense of rightness, the kind that settles into your bones and stays there. After he stood in my hallway and realized I wasn't going to save him from the mess he'd chosen, the noise finally stopped. Or so I thought. A week passed, then another. My life narrowed in the best possible way. Work the climbing gym dinners with friends, quiet nights in my apartment where the only decisions I had to make were what to cook and what to read. I bought a plant and managed not to kill it. I filled the bookshelf slowly, deliberately, one object at a time. Nothing arrived all at once anymore. Nothing demanded my immediate emotional response. The chaos I'd lived in for 3 years had trained me to mistake urgency for importance. Without it, I started to understand how peaceful normal could be. Jake kept his promise to stop giving me updates, but information has a way of leaking through cracks. It came from a mutual friend this time, someone I hadn't spoken to directly in months. A message popped up while I was on my lunch break. I ran into him today. He looks rough. I stared at the screen for a moment before replying with a neutral, I hope he's okay. It was true in the most abstract sense. I hope no one was actively suffering, but hope I was learning did not require involvement. The story unfolded anyway. He'd moved out of the apartment they'd briefly shared. The money he'd lent Lena was gone unrecoverable. She'd disappeared from his life the way she always did when the resources ran dry, leaving behind a trail of explanations that were just convincing enough to sting. His friends were divided between sympathy and quiet judgment. Some of them remembered the night he'd asked me to give up my bed. Some of them remembered my silence afterward. They didn't say anything to him directly, but the shift was palpable. He was no longer the misunderstood good guy. He was the man who had mistaken loyalty for something disposable. The strangest part was how little any of it moved me. I'd expected something. Anger, satisfaction, even delayed grief. But what I felt instead was a mild, distant awareness, like reading about a storm in a city you no longer lived in. I could recognize the damage without wanting to walk through the wreckage. That realization scared me at first. I worried it meant I'd hardened into someone cold. Then I understood something more precise. I wasn't cold, I was done. He tried again indirectly through kindness this time. A mutual friend mentioned he'd been asking about me, framing his questions carefully. Is Allison happy? Does she seem okay? The performance had evolved from entitlement to concern, but the center of it was unchanged. He still believed my emotional state was something he could check in on, something that belonged partially to him. It didn't. It hadn't for a long time. When the direct message finally came weeks later, it was almost polite. I just wanted to say, I hope you're well. I'm sorry for how things ended. There was no ownership in it, no acknowledgement of the specific choice he'd made. It was an apology shaped like a closing argument, designed to soothe his conscience rather than address the harm. I read it once, then deleted it without replying. Silence, I had learned, was not passive. It was a boundary. That night, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea, the city lights flickering beyond my windows, and tried to remember the woman I'd been when I would have agonized over the wording of a response. She would have dissected every sentence, wondered what it meant, hoped it signaled growth. She would have believed that understanding was the same thing as accountability. I felt a brief, distant compassion for her. She'd done the best she could with the information she had at the time. The consequences continued to ripple outward without my participation. He was forced to sit with the reality of what he'd prioritized. Lena moved on to another crisis, another savior, her story resetting the way it always did. And I stayed where I was, anchored, no longer reacting to aftershocks from a fault line I'd already crossed. The past didn't need my forgiveness to keep moving forward. It only needed my absence. The next attempt didn't arrive through a screen or a third party. It arrived in the rain. It was a Thursday evening, gray and cold. The kind of night that makes the city feel smaller and more intimate, as if everyone has agreed to retreat indoors at the same time. I had just set a pot of water on the stove when the intercom buzzed. I wasn't expecting anyone. Jake always texted before coming over. Friends knew my schedule. I pressed the button without thinking. Yes. There was no answer. Just the hollow ambient sound of the lobby, distant footsteps, the faint echo of the front door closing. A minute later, there was a knock. It wasn't confident. It wasn't familiar. 3 light taps, hesitant like the person on the other side wasn't sure they deserved to be heard. Something in my chest tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. I crossed the apartment slowly and looked through the peephole. He stood there, soaked his hair, plastered to his forehead jacket, darkened by rain. Shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen, when he still believed he was in control of the narrative. For a moment, I considered not answering. I had every right to stay silent, to let him stand there until he understood what it felt like to be excluded from a space you once took for granted. But another part of me wanted something different. I wanted confirmation. I wanted to see him up close and feel nothing to prove to myself that the separation was complete. I opened the door just enough to see him fully, the chain still fastened. Cold air rushed in, carrying the damp scent of rain and pavement. His eyes widened with relief the moment he saw me, hope flooding his face so quickly it was almost painful to watch. "Allison," he said, his voice breaking. "Please, just 5 minutes. I need to talk to you." "You shouldn't be here," I replied evenly. "I asked you not to contact me." There was no anger in my tone, no tremor, just fact. "I know," he said quickly. "I know I messed up. I was stupid. I didn't see it then, but I see it now." The words spilled out in a rush, rehearsed and desperate. Lena had lied. She'd taken money. She'd been seeing someone else. Everything I'd warned him about had been true. He choked on a sob halfway through rainwater and tears blurring together on his face. "Everything you ever said was right," he finished. "I should have listened to you. I waited. I didn't step aside. I didn't reach for him. I didn't offer comfort." Silence stretched between us until he looked at me like he was waiting for a cue. "That's unfortunate," I said at last. The word landed badly. He flinched, as if I'd struck him. "Unfortunate," he repeated, disbelief edging into anger. "That's all you have to say." "She stole from me. I lost friends. I lost money. I lost everything. You should file a police report, I said calmly. If money was taken from you, that's a matter for the authorities. His face crumpled. The anger collapsed into panic. I don't want a police report, he said. I want you. I want us back. I know what I had now. I took you for granted. I was blind. The plea was naked, stripped of performance, and in another life, it might have worked. In this one, it only clarified things further. There is no us, I said. There hasn't been for months. The specificity of the time frame seemed to shock him. He'd been living inside the immediacy of his own collapse. I'd been living forward quietly day by day. You don't love me anymore, he whispered, the final weapon, the question designed to pull me back into the familiar role of reassurance. I met his gaze. There was no cruelty in my eyes, but there was no softness either. My feelings are no longer your concern, I said. Our relationship ended the moment you asked me to give up my bed for her. Goodbye. I reached for the door. He shoved his hand against it, desperation turning sharp. So that's it, he snapped. After 3 years, I get a goodbye in a hallway. You're colder than everyone said you were. You're just like her. You use people and walk away when they need you. I paused, the door still ajar, and looked at him one last time. I didn't rise to the insult. I didn't defend myself. Then it should be a relief that you're free of me, I said. Take care of yourself. I closed the door fully and slid the deadbolt into place. The click was louder than the rain. I heard him say my name once, muffled through the door, then the sound of footsteps retreating down the hall, faster this time. When the apartment fell silent again, my heart rate was steady. My hands weren't shaking. I felt tired but clear. The chapter wasn't just closed, it was sealed. The final thread was cut in the most ordinary place imaginable. It wasn't dramatic. There was no rain, no confrontation in a hallway, no raised voices or trembling hands. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning in a coffee shop, 3 blocks from my old apartment, the kind of place I'd avoided for months without consciously deciding to. My usual spot had been closed for renovations, and I had a report to finish, so convenience won over habit. I took a corner table, put on my headphones, and opened my laptop. I didn't see him come in. I felt the presence first, the subtle shift in the air that makes you look up even when you're focused. When I did, he was standing there with a paper cup in his hand, his shoulders slightly hunched, his expression careful in a way that told me he'd been rehearsing this moment. He looked thinner, not theatrically broken, not pitiful, just worn down like someone who had finally run out of stories that worked. Allison, he said softly, you look good. I slid one headphone off my ear and nodded. Thank you. The words came out the way they would have to a coworker or a stranger holding a door. Polite, neutral, an awkward pause stretched between us. Somewhere behind him, a woman I vaguely recognized hovered near the condiment station, pretending to be fascinated by the sugar packets, an audience whether he wanted one or not. I'm moving, he blurted out. I can't afford the apartment alone. He hesitated, then added, Lena cleaned out my savings. The name tasted bitter in his mouth. There it was, the offering. The tragedy laid at my feet, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be redeemed by my reaction. I took a sip of my coffee. It was perfectly cooled. I'm sorry to hear about your financial situation, I said. The sentence landed exactly where it was meant to. His face fell, the carefully constructed hope cracking. That's it, he asked, his voice tight. After 3 years. That's all you have to say. I looked at him steadily, keeping my voice low enough that he had to lean in slightly to hear me breaking the illusion of a public scene. That chapter is closed, I said. I've moved on. I suggest you do the same. Dwelling isn't healthy. His eyes scanned my face, then flicked briefly around the cafe as if searching for proof of something else, someone else. The question that followed was instinctive, possessive, and completely irrelevant. Are you seeing anyone? I almost smiled. Whether I am or not doesn't concern you, I replied. What matters is that I'm at peace. I paused, then added gently but firmly, your feelings, your finances, your recovery. They're not my responsibility. Something in him seemed to deflate then, not anger, not defensiveness, just the quiet realization that there was nothing left to argue against, no opening, no leverage. I was not his backup plan, not his moral sounding board, not the woman waiting patiently while he learned his lessons. You never loved me, he said one last time, the final weapon drawn from habit more than belief. I didn't flinch. I loved you more than you understood, I said. But love requires respect. You showed me exactly where I stood, so I chose to stand somewhere else. For a moment, he just looked at me. The performance ended. What remained was a man facing the unchangeable consequences of his own choices without an audience willing to applaud his remorse. His shoulders slumped. He nodded once, shallow and defeated. "Take care of yourself," I said, not unkindly. It was a dismissal, but a clean one. I put my headphone back on, closed my laptop, and stood. As I turned toward the door, a colleague of mine was just walking in, waving apologetically about traffic. I smiled, held the door open, and stepped outside with him into the crisp air. I didn't look back. I didn't wonder what he was doing. I didn't feel victorious or cruel or sad. I felt finished. The last